Dun 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 dun. This argument is an argument for God's existence. Russell is going to give us an argument that this argument, the first cause argument, fails. The first cause argument, premise 1. If everything had a cause, then the chain of causes would go back infinitely. There would never be a starting point, because for any event, there would be a cause of it, and there would be a cause of the cause, and so on, infinitely. But if there was no starting point, no event would have ever happened. If you see dominoes falling like they're depicted in the picture, then you would have to conclude that there had to be a first cause. A finger that was not hit by another domino had to initiate the sequence. If nobody pushed the first domino, if a finger didn't push the first domino, the sequence of dominoes falling never would have happened. But events did happen. The universe formed, for example. Therefore, there is a first uncaused cause, and this we call God. Russell's argument by analogy against the first cause argument. Premise 1. You know that the Hindu philosopher's tortoise explanation of what holds up the earth is bad. It doesn't really explain anything. It's a joke. Premise 2. But the first cause argument is like the Hindu philosopher's tortoise explanation because it doesn't really explain anything either. After all, what caused God? Conclusion. Therefore, we should reject the first cause argument for God's existence.
The first cause argument. Perhaps the simplest and easiest to understand is the argument of the first cause. It is maintained that everything we see in this world has a cause, and as you go back in the chain of causes further and further, you must come to a first cause, and to that first cause you give the name of God. That argument, I suppose, does not carry very much weight nowadays, because, in the first place, cause is not quite what it used to be. The philosophers and the men of science have got going on cause, and it is not anything like the vitality it used to have. But apart from that, you can see that the argument that there must be a first cause is one that cannot have any validity. I may say that when I was a young man, and was debating these questions very seriously in my mind, I for a long time accepted the argument of the first cause, until one day, at the age of 18, I read John Stuart Mill's autobiography, and I there found this sentence: "My father taught me that the question, 'Who made me?' cannot be answered, since it immediately suggests the further question, 'Who made God?'" That very simple sentence showed me, as I still think, the fallacy in the argument of the first cause. If everything must have a cause, then God must have a cause. If there can be anything without a cause, it may just as well be the world as God, so that there cannot be any validity in that argument. It is exactly of the same nature as the Hindus' view that the world rested upon an elephant, and the elephant rested upon a tortoise, and when they said, "How about the tortoise?" the Indian said, "Suppose we change the subject." The argument is really no better than that.
Okay, here's Russell's story. Russell meets a Hindu philosopher, and he asks the Hindu philosopher what holds up the earth. The Hindu philosopher says, "Oh, well, the earth is on the back of an elephant." Russell says, "Well, what holds up the elephant?" The Hindu philosopher says, "Oh, well, that's a giant tortoise." Russell says, "What holds up the tortoise?" The Hindu philosopher says, "Suppose we change the subject." Now, I used to think Russell was being racist with this joke that he's telling, and maybe he was, but I now tend to think that he's tricking his audience. He's luring them into laughing at another person's belief system. So that's the bait premise, to say, look at how foolish this tortoise explanation is. You agree, don't you? Ha ha ha. To get the audience to laugh at it. Then he moves to the comparison premise, and he says, but the first cause argument is no different than the tortoise explanation. In the quote, he says, the two are exactly the same. So if you think the tortoise explanation is a bad explanation because it doesn't really explain anything, then you ought to believe that the first cause argument is a bad argument because it doesn't really explain anything. The big question is, what caused God? Here's another way to look at Russell's point, a little diagram I made. You can see that the explanation and the argument are equivalent. On the left, I have the first cause argument. What caused the universe? Well, the Big Bang. What caused the Big Bang? God. Yes, but what caused God? The Christian has no answer, Russell thinks. Well, it's the same as with the Hindu philosopher's tortoise explanation. What holds up the earth? The elephant. What holds up the elephant? The tortoise. What holds up the tortoise? Suppose let's change the subject. They are really the same, Russell tells us. Okay, now we come to the part where we evaluate Russell's argument. Here's the checklist for argument by analogy. So there are two questions. Is the first premise true or acceptable? Well, the first premise just says that the Hindu philosopher's tortoise explanation of what holds up the earth is bad. And you could try to argue against that, but I'm not going to go there. I think it is a bad explanation because it doesn't really explain anything, because at the key point of explaining what holds up the tortoise, the Hindu philosopher supposedly says, why don't we talk about something else? So I'm not going to go after P1. Now, the second question for argument by analogy from the green video is, in P2, are the two things being compared alike enough to justify you in believing the conclusion? In other words, are they relevantly similar in a way that lets you draw the conclusion that the argument draws? Now, I'm thinking on this one, and premise 2 says the first cause argument is like the Hindu philosopher's tortoise explanation because neither one really explains anything. The issue is what caused God. And Russell is saying that those two cases are identical. In other words, that the first cause argument is just as bad as the Hindu philosopher's supposed tortoise explanation. But I'm going to go after that one because I may not think the first cause argument is great, but I don't think it's as bad as that tortoise explanation, which really was told as a joke. So what would be the disanalogy? What's the difference between the two cases so that the first cause argument is not alike enough with the tortoise explanation to draw the conclusion that the first cause argument is bad, like the tortoise explanation is? All right, so here's how I'm going to start my criticism of Russell. This is an argument by analogy. It violates the rule that says the two things being compared must be alike in a way that lets you draw the conclusion. But there is a relevant difference between the first cause argument and the Hindu tortoise explanation of what holds up the earth. Well, now I have to articulate what that difference is. So how am I going to explain the difference between the two cases? You know what? I'm going to let you take a quiz below and choose the best articulation of a difference between the two cases. And I'll let you do it an infinite number of times, so you'll get the right answer and you'll get the points for doing it. But I'm just going to put that little quiz below. I think I'll name it the tortoise argument or something like that. Objection to the tortoise argument. Who knows? I mean, good grief, it's 11:11 at night. Oh, make a wish. Anyway, yeah, we'll do it that way so you can think about it too. And maybe we'll ask our old buddy Chat GPT on this one too. But anyway, more soon.